Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The maps were spread across the table, flickering under the pale glow of fluorescent light. Every man around it leaned forward, voices low, tactical words bouncing off concrete walls. But when Captain Sarah Mitchell spoke, her words seemed to vanish like smoke in a wind tunnel. She wasn't new. She wasn't unproven. Yet still, in this room full of soldiers, she could feel it, the quiet skepticism, the kind that never had to be said out loud. "Ghost, what's your read?" Colonel Mitchell finally asked, eyes shifting toward her with the kind of professional distance only a superior officer could maintain. She stood straighter. "The pattern's wrong, sir. The convoy's too organized, too clean. It doesn't match the chatter we've been intercepting for the last week." A few heads turned her way, then turned back. Someone coughed. Someone else adjusted their gear. The colonel nodded but didn't respond. He didn't have to. The orders were already given. That night, under the blinding Afghan sun fading into orange dust, Sarah lay prone on a rocky ridge, the world reduced to the narrow black circle of her sniper scope. The air shimmered with heat. Wind whispered through the valley. And below, the compound, a mess of walls and guard towers, waited like a living thing. 6 days of surveillance had turned into one long blur of sand, sweat, and silence. Every heartbeat, every second spent waiting for the perfect moment. "Ghost actual to all points," she whispered, her voice steady despite the static in her earpiece. "Targets moving." Her call sign Ghost wasn't just a name. It was a story whispered among units. 2 years ago, she had vanished into a sandstorm near Mosul, outnumbered, wounded, presumed dead. She returned 3 days later, dragging 2 captured insurgents and a rifle with sand still caked in its chamber. The name stuck. Her finger rested lightly against the trigger of her custom M24 rifle, black matte steel, polished smooth at the cheek rest from years of use. She knew every scratch on its surface, every imperfection that made it hers. "Control, I count 8 tangos, not 4. Silence, then a voice crackled through. "Copy, Ghost, proceed with caution. QRF is 2 hours out." 2 hours. In Afghanistan, 2 hours might as well mean never. Sarah exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the inside of her scope. Below, shadows moved. One of the hostages stumbled, pushed forward by a guard with a rifle. American aid workers. 6 days in that compound, dehydrated, beaten, terrified. Her finger twitched. "Hold," she whispered to herself. "Not yet." She scanned the horizon, the hills, the roads, every inch of the valley. Her instincts screamed something was wrong. It was too quiet. The pattern of movement too deliberate. She learned to trust that feeling, the same one that had saved her life, when a sniper's bullet whistled past her ear in Mosul, missing by inches. "Control, I've got movement on the ridge. North side, possible eyes." No reply, just static. She frowned, adjusted her frequency, tried again. "Control, say again, do you copy?" Still nothing. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Then a flicker of light, a glint from a rifle scope. "Contact North Ridge." Her first shot cracked through the silence, echoing off stone and sand. A clean hit. The second came half a second later. Another target dropped. "Go," she hissed into comms. "Execute." Delta operators broke from cover, moving like shadows across the terrain. Precision. Coordination. They breached the compound in perfect rhythm, flashbangs, controlled bursts, doors splintering. Inside, chaos erupted. "Hostages secured," came a voice through the static. Sarah allowed herself one small breath of relief, then heard it. Thump. Her blood went cold. Mortar launch. "Incoming, take cover." The first shell hit 50 meters to her right, a burst of flame and dust. The second landed closer, rattling the rocks beneath her. The third, she didn't hear coming. The blast tore through the ridge, flinging her backward. For a second, everything was silent. Then the pain hit white-hot, pulsing from her left thigh. She couldn't move her leg. Shrapnel. Deep. She could feel the warm rush of blood soaking through her pants. Ghost status. She forced air into her lungs. Wounded, but I'm mobile. Her hands moved automatically. Tourniquet, tighten, morphine injector, 1 dose, bite down, breathe. The mission wasn't over, not until they were all out. She rolled onto her stomach, dragging herself toward cover, scanning for threats. Smoke curled across the valley. The compound was burning. Her radio hissed again, faint voices cutting through. Hostages secure. Enemy reinforcements inbound. Ghost, get to extraction. She nodded even though no one could see her, pushed herself up, tested her leg. Pain flared, but she could move. Barely. The extraction point was 15 miles through open terrain. Mountains crawling with Taliban fighters. She started walking. Every step sent a spike of fire through her thigh, but stopping wasn't an option. Behind her, the compound exploded again, secondary detonations. They must have found the ammo cache. She didn't look back. The night closed around her, cold and silent. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of pain and breath. Step, drag, step, drag. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Or maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. Her radio had died hours ago. Her morphine wore off. Fever crept in. The wound was angry, throbbing, swollen, hot, infection. She could smell it. She tore a strip from her undershirt and changed the bandage by moonlight, jaw clenched tight to keep from crying out. When she looked up, the sky was vast and impossibly bright with stars. It reminded her of nights on base, before the missions, before the silence, when laughter echoed through tents and the world still felt human. She wondered if her team made it, wondered if Colonel Mitchell believed she was still alive. He would, he always did. As dawn bled over the horizon, she reached higher ground. From there, she could see the valley smoke still rising from what was left of the compound. And then the faint rhythm of rotors. She looked up, a Chinook flying low, searchlights scanning. Hoping. She lifted her arm, waved, though she knew they couldn't see her from that distance. Then the sound no soldier mistakes. An RPG launch. Her breath caught. No. The missile streaked upward, a fiery line through the pale morning sky. The explosion tore through the helicopter's side, sending it spinning. God, she whispered, helpless as it fell. The pilot fought for control, managed to crash land instead of plummeting outright. Smoke and fire bloomed in the valley. Through her scope, cracked but functional, she saw them. Survivors, 4, staggering from the wreckage. And insurgents converging fast. She didn't think. She adjusted windage. Distance, 820 meters. Altitude drop, 32 degrees. Her leg trembled, fever burning her vision. Come on, she muttered, just breathe. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The first hostile dropped instantly. Bolt, reload, breath, fire. Another down. The rest scattered, confused, seeking cover. That was enough. The survivors scrambled into the rocks. But now her position was blown. Voices, shouts in Pashto, echoing across the ridge. She grabbed her gear, dragging her leg, forcing herself into motion. A bullet struck stone inches from her head. Shards sliced across her cheek. She fired back with her sidearm, 3 shots, then silence. The chase lasted hours. Up cliffs, through ravines, across frozen streams. Each time she thought she'd lost them, another shadow appeared in the corner of her vision. By dusk she was cornered. A cliff edge before her, a roaring river below. Behind, the enemy closing in, 12, maybe 15. She checked her rifle, 2 rounds left, sidearm 3. No good options. She smiled grimly, story of my life. She fired both rifle shots into the rocks opposite, sparks, echoes, confusion. Then she holstered her pistol, took one last breath and jumped. The fall knocked the air from her lungs. The water was freezing, violent, dragging her under. Her wounded leg screamed with every twist. She hit rocks, tumbled, surfaced gasping. She didn't know how long she fought the current before it threw her onto a sandbar downstream. The stars blurred above her. Her body shook uncontrollably. She forced herself to crawl, teeth chattering, every movement agony. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice spoke, the same one that always carried her through the darkness. "Get up." She did. Step, drag, step, drag. By the time the sky began to pale again, she was barely conscious. Then she saw it, a structure on the horizon, faint, angular. An American outpost. She almost laughed, almost. Her leg gave out less than a mile away. She fell face first into the dirt, groaning. But she didn't stop. She crawled elbows, one good leg, leaving a crimson trail behind her. Voices shouted from the outpost. Figures appeared. One raised binoculars. Even through the haze, she knew that stance. Colonel William Mitchell. "Hold fire," his voice echoed across the barren plain. "That's Captain Mitchell." She tried to answer, but no sound came out. The last thing she remembered was his voice, breaking through the static of her fatting mind. "Sarah." And then darkness. Why was it so quiet? That was the first thing she noticed. Not the pain, not the light, the silence. Then came the smell, antiseptic, cold, familiar. A hospital. Her eyes opened to a blur of white. A ceiling fan spun lazily above her. Something beeped near her ear in slow, steady rhythm. She tried to move, but the effort sent pain shooting up her leg like lightning. Her throat was dry. Her lips cracked. "Easy, Captain." A voice, low, steady, unmistakably human, after what felt like an eternity, surrounded by nothing but explosions and ghosts. She blinked. The shape beside her came into focus. Colonel William Mitchell. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. He looked older somehow, the lines deeper, the uniform wrinkled, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "You're safe," he said softly. Her voice came out as a rasp. "The hostages." "Safe, all of them, extracted successfully." Her eyes drifted shut again, but this time it wasn't exhaustion. It was relief. The colonel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You shouldn't be alive, Ghost. 15 miles through enemy territory, wounded, no radio, infection setting in. You walked into hell and back." She managed a faint, dry laugh. "Couldn't let the team down." He looked away for a moment, jaw tightening. "You didn't. You saved them. You saved all of us." Outside, the muffled sound of helicopters thudded against the desert wind. Somewhere beyond the tent walls, soldiers moved, medics shouting, stretchers rolling, life going on. But inside it was still. Sarah stared at the ceiling, counting the blades as they spun. 1, 2, 3. Her body ached, but her mind raced. She remembered the explosion, the river, the cold, the faces of the men she shot to protect the downed crew, and she remembered the silence afterward, the kind that wasn't peace but absence. "You found me," she murmured. "I wasn't leaving without you," Mitchell replied, and for the first time his voice cracked. "When I saw you crawling toward the perimeter, I thought it was a ghost, literally." Her lips curved slightly. "Guess the name fits." He smiled, small, tired, real. The days that followed blurred together, flashes of light, antiseptic smells, morphine dreams. Doctors, nurses, questions. When she woke again, she was in a real hospital, metal walls, proper lighting, the hum of generators. Bagram Airfield. Her body was weaker now. Tubes ran from her arms. Her leg was wrapped in layers of gauze and brace, elevated. The infection had nearly killed her, twice. Every time she drifted into the fever dreams, she saw faces, her team, the hostages, the pilot of the downed Chinook. And always she saw the ones who didn't make it, the shadows she couldn't save. That's what stayed with her, not the pain, not the metal talk she overheard from passing officers, the guilt. She survived when she shouldn't have, and part of her couldn't understand why. Captain Mitchell. The voice snapped her from thought. A woman in a dark blue uniform stood at the door, sharp posture, silver stars glinting in the light. General Wolfenberger, Sarah said immediately, forcing herself upright. Pain lanced through her, but she didn't show it. At ease, the general said, stepping forward. Her presence filled the room, composed, commanding, but not cold. I heard about the operation, Wolfenberger began. Your actions saved 7 Americans and provided key intelligence on Taliban movements in Kandahar. You also neutralized 14 enemy combatants while evading capture. Sarah stared at the floor. Just doing my job, ma'am. The general studied her quietly. That's what they all say, but not everyone does it with a hole in their leg and a rifle running dry. There was a pause, the air between them heavy with the kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Wolfenberger's tone softened. You know, when I pushed for female operators in Delta, a lot of people laughed. They said we weren't built for it. You proved them wrong. Sarah hesitated. With respect, ma'am, I'm not sure I proved anything. The cost. The cost, the general interrupted gently, is what makes it matter. She left a medal on the bedside table, unpinned, unceremonious. For when you're ready to accept it, she said, and turned to leave. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. The morphine fog was gone, replaced by a clarity she didn't want. Every sound in the ward, a door closing, a monitor beeping, pulled her back to that night in the valley. The cold water, the shouting, the fire. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, a helicopter lifted into the sky, its rotors cutting through the dust like slow thunder. She wondered if she'd ever fly again, if she'd ever walk without pain, if she'd ever be anything other than the woman who didn't die when she was supposed to. Weeks passed, physical therapy began. Each session was a war of its own, not against an enemy, but her own body. The first time she tried to stand, she collapsed. The second time, she nearly screamed. The third, she stayed upright just long enough to see her reflection in the window, pale, exhausted, hair cropped short, eyes haunted. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. But deep down, she could still see the soldier, the one who refused to give up, even when crawling through mud and blood. Mitchell, the therapist said one afternoon, sweat glistening on her forehead, "You've got a stubborn streak." Sarah smirked faintly. "You're just figuring that out." Each day she gained a little more strength, a few more steps, a few more hours without painkillers. And then one morning, when she arrived for therapy, the nurse handed her a letter. Official orders, transfer to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The paper shook slightly in her hands. Her war in Afghanistan was over, but something in her chest told her the real battle hadn't even started yet. When the medevac finally came, she looked out over the mountains one last time from the helicopter window. They stretched endlessly beneath her, rugged, ancient, indifferent. She thought about the men she'd lost, the team she'd saved, the lives that would go on because of her. She didn't feel pride. She felt weight, the kind of weight only survivors carry. At Walter Reed, the air smelled different, clean, controlled, American. Doctors moved with quiet efficiency. Patients wheeled down halls. The walls were white, sterile, safe, almost too quiet after years of chaos. For the first few days, she barely spoke. Then on the fourth morning, she heard it, boots in the hallway, a familiar cadence. Permission to enter. Colonel Mitchell stepped inside, holding a small black box. "You're supposed to rest," she said, smirking faintly. "I'm terrible at orders," he replied, setting the box down on the table beside her bed. "Figured you want to see this before everyone else starts making speeches." He opened it. Inside, a Distinguished Service Cross. Only the second ever awarded to a woman in Delta Force history. Sarah stared at it. The silver caught the light, reflecting her face, tired, scarred, but alive. "I didn't do it for that," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That's why you deserve it." For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I'm not going back, am I?" The colonel's jaw tightened. "Your leg too damaged. Nerve trauma, you'll walk but not run, not jump, not operate." She swallowed hard, looked out the window again. "Then who am I now?" she murmured. He didn't answer, he didn't have to. The silence said enough. That night she sat alone, watching the city lights flicker outside. Her reflection hovered over them like a ghost fitting, she thought. She remembered the general's words, "The cost is what makes it matter." Maybe she wasn't meant to go back into the field. Maybe she was meant to build something from what she'd lost. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear the river, the gunfire, the voices calling her name. But she also heard something new, faint, but growing louder. Purpose. Not the kind you find in orders or medals, the kind you build from the ashes. Sometimes survival isn't victory. It's the quiet permission to start again. Why did it feel harder now than it ever did in war? Months had passed since the explosion, but the real fight had only just begun. The kind without a rifle, without orders, without a clear enemy. The kind you fought inside your own skin. Sarah Mitchell moved slowly down the therapy hall, cane tapping against the polished floor. Each step was a conversation between pain and defiance. The doctor said she was progressing. The physical therapist said she was a miracle. She didn't feel like one. The mirror at the end of the hallway reflected someone she barely recognized, still strong, still standing but quieter. She used to measure days by missions completed, objectives cleared, targets neutralized. Now she measured them in inches in the distance from her bed to the window. "Morning, Captain," called a familiar voice from behind. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez, the Chinook pilot she had saved that day in the valley. He walked with a brace on his arm and a limp of his own. His grin, though, was easy and real. "Lieutenant," she replied, nodding, her tone more formal than she meant it to be. "You ever think you get sick of hospital coffee?" he asked, holding up 2 paper cups. "Day 3, she said, "the taste of regret." He laughed, the kind of laugh that made the sterile walls feel a little less empty. They stood by the window, watching snow fall quietly over Washington, D.C. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. Finally, Rodriguez said, "I heard what the general said at your ceremony, that you changed how people see us. She's right, you know." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't change anything, I just didn't die." He looked at her carefully. "Yeah, but you didn't let anyone else die either." The words lingered after he left. Maybe it wasn't about changing the world. Maybe it was just about holding the line long enough for someone else to keep going. She spent that night staring at the ceiling again, listening to the rain against the window. Her leg ached, but the ache had become part of her, a pulse reminding her she was still here. She thought of the team scattered now across different assignments, some still overseas, some gone forever. The names came to her like prayers. Sullivan, Rizat, Taylor. Ghosts of her own making. She missed the rhythm of it, the radio clicks, the unspoken trust, the sense of belonging that came with people who understood the silence between gunfire. Here, surrounded by clean sheets and polite smiles, she felt invisible again, just like at that first briefing table. Then one morning, she woke to a knock on her door. The nurse entered with a visitor's badge in hand. "Someone's here to see you, Captain. She said it's important." Sarah frowned. "Who?" "Lieutenant General Merrill Tangdahl." The name landed like a weight. Tangdahl was high-level, Joint Special Operations Command, not someone who made courtesy calls. Minutes later, the door opened. Tangdahl stepped in, crisp and calm, the kind of presence that made the air seem sharper. "Captain Mitchell," she greeted, offering a hand. "You've been busy surviving." Sarah managed a dry smile. "Doing my best, ma'am." Tangdahl took a seat. "I won't take much of your time. I'm here because we're forming something new, a Special Operations Advisory Unit. It's meant to bridge the gap between field operators and strategic command. Sarah's brow furrowed. You want me to advise? I want you to lead, the general replied simply. You understand modern warfare, the kind that doesn't end when the shooting stops. You understand loss, leadership, and the limits of endurance. Sarah leaned back slowly. With respect, ma'am, I'm not exactly combat ready. Tandal's gaze didn't waver. We don't need your trigger finger, we need your mind. For the first time in months, Sarah didn't know what to say. The general continued. We're calling it the Mitchell Protocol, at least unofficially, a doctrine for preparing operators for the chaos of reality, not just tactics, psychology, survival, moral resilience. Sarah blinked. The Mitchell Protocol. It started as a joke, Tangdahl admitted, smiling faintly. Colonel Mitchell mentioned it when we debriefed him, said if you trained every sniper, we'd have half the casualties. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, part disbelief, part something deeper. I need time to think, she said quietly. Take it, the general replied, standing. But don't take too long. The next generation is already waiting. When she left, the room felt smaller somehow. Sarah stared at the cane resting by her bed. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that survival isn't weakness. It's endurance. Later that night, she sat on the balcony of her recovery ward, wrapped in a blanket, staring out over the city lights. She thought about what Tangdahl said, about the protocol, about teaching others to face the things she'd barely survived herself. Could she do that? Could she lead again from a place of scars instead of strength? Her mind drifted back to Afghanistan. The ridge, the water, the pain, and then the voice, her own, whispering through static, I'm not done yet. She took a slow breath. Maybe this was what that meant. 3 weeks later, she stood in a briefing room again, this time as the instructor. The air smelled of gun oil and chalk dust. Charts lined the walls, maps, markers, tactical layouts. But what caught her eye were the faces. 30 operators, men and women, seated in perfect formation, watching, listening. Among them 3 women. Their expressions reminded her of her own years ago, cautious, determined, waiting to be tested. She leaned against the desk, her cane beside her, and said the first words that came naturally. The battlefield doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your fear, she began, her voice calm but commanding. It only respects preparation, adaptability, and will. I'm here to make sure you have all 3. The room was silent, every head forward, every heartbeat listening. She moved slowly as she spoke, the cane clicking softly against the floor. You'll train for what's coming, not just the mission, but what happens after, the silence, the guilt, the doubts that follow you home. That's what breaks most soldiers, not the bullet, the memory. No one moved, no one looked away. Sarah saw herself in them, the same hunger, the same fear of failing. And for the first time since Afghanistan, she felt something close to belonging. After the session, Rodriguez, now reassigned to training, approached her. You were born for this, you know, he said. She smiled faintly. No one's born for it, we just adapt. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through gray clouds, washing the tarmac in gold. Sarah stood by the window, watching a formation of recruits jog past. One stumbled, another helped them up without hesitation. That small act, unspoken, instinctive, hit her harder than any medal or speech ever could. Maybe this was her purpose, not to pull the trigger, but to make sure others would know when not to. That night, as the lights dimmed and the corridors fell quiet, she sat alone in the empty classroom. The cane rested beside her chair. Her hand brushed across the whiteboard where she had written 3 words earlier that day. Endure, adapt, return. The motto of the Mitchell Protocol. She smiled to herself. the kind of quiet smile that comes not from pride but peace. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. Sometimes strength isn't in fighting harder. It's in learning when to teach others how to survive. Why did she feel nervous after everything she had survived? Combat didn't scare her anymore. Pain didn't either. But standing at the front of that training hall with 30 sets of eyes staring at her in silence, that was different. Because this time, it wasn't about pulling a trigger. It was about building people who might one day have to. The classroom smelled of oil, sweat, and chalk, a mix of old-world discipline and new-world exhaustion. Maps covered the walls. A projector flickered quietly. The recruits sat straight-backed, notebooks open, pens unmoving. "Let's start with something simple," she said, leaning lightly on her cane. "Who here thinks they're ready for war?" A few hands rose, some hesitated, some didn't move at all. Sarah scanned the room. Good, because the right answer was no one. A ripple of unease spread. "War doesn't care about your confidence," she continued. "It doesn't reward bravery, it punishes mistakes. And the people who come home, the ones you call heroes, they don't feel like heroes at all." Her voice stayed calm, deliberate, but her words landed like bullets. "You're going to learn tactics, infiltration, survival, evasion, all the things you expect. But the first thing I'll teach you is this: every mission has two endings. The one they write down in the report and the one that stays in your head." Silence followed. It wasn't fear. It was attention, sharp, focused, total. "Lesson 1 of the Mitchell Protocol," she said, stepping closer. "You can survive anything if you remember why you're fighting. Not for glory, not for medals, for the person next to you, for the ones who'll never know your name." She paused, resting her cane against the desk. Her hand trembled slightly, a small tremor she'd learned to hide. A trainee in the front row raised his hand. "Ma'am, did you ever, freeze out there?" Sarah looked at him for a long time. The room waited. "Yes," she said softly, "twice." The trainee blinked. "What did you do?" "I remembered who I was protecting." Her tone was simple, almost too quiet, but it silenced the room. After class, she lingered alone, the room empty, the echoes fatting. The projector light flickered across her face, turning her reflection into something half-real. She remembered the boy's question, "Did you ever freeze?" Every soldier does. The real question is whether they can move again. The following weeks bled together, long days, longer nights. She oversaw shooting drills, endurance training, decision simulations. Her cane didn't slow her down, it commanded respect. But not everyone believed in her methods. One afternoon, she entered the training yard to find Colonel Haynes, a grizzled veteran from an older generation, watching her class. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. "Colonel," she greeted. He nodded curtly. "Captain Mitchell, heard you're running things a bit differently here." She wiped sweat from her brow, just trying to make sure they survive. By talking about feelings, his tone was half amusement, half challenge. Sarah met his gaze. By preparing them for what kills soldiers more than bullets, silence, guilt, the kind that eats you when the noise stops. Haynes chuckled dryly. "You sound like a therapist, not an operator." "Maybe that's what this war needs," she replied evenly. He didn't answer, just studied her for a moment longer before turning away. But as he walked off, one of her trainees approached her, a young woman named Alvarez, barely 24, steady eyes, determined jaw. "Ma'am," Alvarez said quietly, "what you said in class today about freezing, it helped. I froze on the range last week. Thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this." Sarah tilted her head. "And now?" "Now I know everyone freezes, even ghosts." Sarah smiled, small, proud. "Good, then you're ready to learn how to unfreeze." That night she couldn't sleep. Her leg throbbed, the scar tissue pulling tight under the skin. She sat by her window, watching the rain streak the glass, listening to the faint hum of the city below. She thought of the new generation, these young faces stepping into the same darkness she'd barely survived. Was she helping them, or sending them to the same pain she carried every night? The question clawed at her in the quiet hours. 2 weeks later, she received word. One of the graduates from her first class had been deployed. She didn't ask where, didn't want to. But 3 months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, torn at the edges. Captain Mitchell, you told us to remember why we fight. I did. When the chaos started, when everything went wrong, those words kept me alive. The Mitchell Protocol saved my team. We came home. Thank you. Her hands shook as she read it, not because of pride, but because the words carried weight, the kind that hurt and healed at the same time. She kept that letter in her pocket for days, folded neatly beside her ID badge. During another session, she used it to teach a point. She held the paper up in front of the recruits. This, she said, is what leadership means, not medals, not rank, legacy. If one person comes home because of what you taught them, that's worth more than any decoration. Her voice wavered for the first time since she'd started teaching, and maybe that made it even more real. After class, Colonel Haynes found her again. This time he didn't challenge her. He just nodded once and said, "Keep doing what you're doing, Ghost." It was the first time he'd used her call sign. She nodded back, understanding what that meant in his language: respect earned, not given. Weeks turned into months. The Mitchell Protocol expanded, now part of training manuals, simulation programs, leadership courses. Her name was whispered in bases around the world. But she stayed grounded. She refused interviews, turned down speeches. She still woke up at 4:30 every morning, ran drills, coached recruits, wrote after-action notes. One night she found herself in the firing range after everyone else had left. The smell of gunpowder and metal filled the air. She loaded a rifle, aimed downrange, and fired. The recoil was sharp. Her leg tensed, balance wavering, but she stayed steady. For the first time since Afghanistan, the sound didn't echo pain. It echoed closure. She lowered the weapon slowly, resting it on the table. Her reflection in the glass looked older, scarred but alive. Rodriguez entered quietly, leaning against the doorway. Couldn't sleep again. She smirked, "You know me." He nodded toward the targets, "Still got it." "Muscle memory," she said. He watched her for a moment. "You know, the recruits talk about you like you're a legend." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Legends don't limp." "Maybe that's why they listen," he said softly. "Because you're proof that strength doesn't mean never breaking." For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she smiled faintly. "Maybe." As Rodriguez left, she turned back to the rifle. Her hand hovered over it, then withdrew. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Outside, the wind shifted. The first snow of winter began to fall. Sarah watched it through the window, the flakes drifting softly against the night sky. She thought about every soldier she'd trained, everyone she'd lost. And somewhere deep inside, she realized something that made her chest tighten, not with grief, but gratitude. She had spent years trying to survive war. Now she was finally learning how to live after it. She turned off the lights, grabbed her cane, and walked out of the range. The echo of her footsteps faded into silence. And for the first time in a long time, that silence didn't feel empty. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is teach others how to come home whole. Why was she back in a war zone? She had sworn she'd never breathe that air again, the kind that smelled like dust, diesel, and distance. But there she was, stepping off a transport plane into the Afghan heat, cane in hand, uniform crisp, heart uncertain. The invitation hadn't been optional. "Captain Mitchell, we'd like you to observe a multinational training exercise," the letter had said. "Consult, advise, no field engagement." It was supposed to be simple, safe. But nothing about Afghanistan ever stayed simple for long. As she walked across the tarmac, the wind whipped at her hair. Helicopters lifted in the distance. The horizon shimmered with heat and memory. Her escort, a young lieutenant with an eager smile, saluted quickly. "Ma'am, we're honored to have you. The troops have been quoting the Mitchell Protocol since we arrived." She gave a polite nod. "Let's hope they're using it for the right reasons." The base was new, temporary walls, sandbags, tents, yet it felt familiar. Every sound, every smell carried ghosts of the past. Her cane sank slightly into the sand as she moved. Every step reminded her of the leg that hadn't healed perfectly. A dull ache, a permanent echo of survival. Inside the operations tent, the air was thick with radio chatter and generator hum. A group of soldiers from different nations gathered around a digital map. The officer in charge turned as she entered. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he said, extending a hand. "Or should I say legend?" She ignored the compliment. "What's the mission, Colonel?" "Joint exercise," he said, gesturing toward the map. "A rescue simulation. 2 Allied hostages, 3-man recon team extraction. Your protocol inspired the framework. We want you to evaluate it." Her jaw tightened slightly. A rescue, the kind that had almost ended her life. "I'll observe," she said simply. The colonel nodded, sensing the boundary. "First briefing at 600. You'll meet the team then." That night she couldn't sleep. The tent walls flapped softly in the wind, carrying the sounds of distant engines and faint laughter. She sat by a dim lamp, flipping through the training manual they'd drafted from her doctrine. Words she'd written now printed in neat, confident typeface. Endure, adapt, return. The 3 words she'd once scrawled on a whiteboard, now quoted in field manuals across bases she'd never see. It should have made her proud. Instead, it made her ache. She thought about what she'd told her trainees, about fear, guilt, and purpose. She'd never expected to have to prove it again. At dawn, she joined the observation team at the ridge overlooking the simulated target zone, a mock compound built from shipping containers and plywood. Cameras monitored every angle. Soldiers moved below in tactical rhythm, practicing what she had taught, step by step. The young lieutenant from earlier handed her a headset. "You'll be on Overwatch audio, ma'am. We'll run the scenario in real-time conditions." "Understood." The exercise began smoothly. Recon moved in. Perimeter secured. Hostages located. Sarah listened closely, each word, each breath of the operators below. The tone, the coordination, the confidence. They were doing it right. Then static. "Team 1, say again." No response. She glanced toward the control screens. One camera feed flickered, then went dark. The colonel frowned, probably a signal glitch. Another camera went out, then another. Sarah's gut tightened. That's not interference. Before anyone could respond, the sharp echo of distant gunfire cut through the valley. Not blanks, not simulation. "Confirm, are those live rounds?" the colonel barked. A soldier at the console looked up, face pale. "Sir, that wasn't us. That's real." Chaos rippled through the tent. Officers grabbed radios, shouting orders. Sarah froze for half a second, the same way she had all those years ago when everything went wrong. Then training took over. "Shut down the exercise perimeter. Who's out there?" she demanded. The colonel hesitated. 4 American, 2 British, 1 Canadian. Real operators, just drills. "Not anymore," Sarah said sharply. "You've got a live ambush on your hands." The radio crackled, panic on the other end. "This is Alpha 2. We've taken fire from the ridgeline. 2 men down. Request immediate QRF." The colonel turned to her. "Our nearest unit's 20 minutes out." "Too long," she said, already grabbing a vest. "You can't go out there," he snapped. "You're advisory only." She met his eyes, calm, cold, unshaken. Then advised me not to. Before he could stop her, she limped out into the daylight. The terrain stretched before her, open desert, low ridges, and the faint echo of gunfire rolling across the valley. She moved fast despite the pain. Years of discipline, muscle memory, and instinct guided every step. At the edge of the observation ridge, she raised her binoculars. Smoke curled from a small cluster of rocks near the mock compound. She spotted movement, flashes of muzzle fire. Insurgents, not part of the exercise, not supposed to be anywhere near the base. She keyed her radio. Alpha 2, this is Ghost Actual, mark your position. The reply came in gasps. Copy Ghost, say again. Hold your line, help's coming. Do you have visual on enemy strength? 8 to 10 hostiles, maybe more. Sarah turned to the soldiers behind her. You, and you, grab ammo and a med kit. Follow my lead. The lieutenant hesitated. Ma'am, your leg. Still works, she snapped. Move. They descended fast, dust kicking up around their boots. The sound of gunfire grew louder, sharper. Sarah ducked behind a boulder, scanning the slope below. She could see the trapped operators pinned down behind a burned-out Humvee, returning fire. Her breath steadied, focus narrowed. For the first time in years, she felt the old rhythm return, the silent math of angles, wind, and range. She picked up a fallen rifle, checked the sight, exhaled. 2 quick shots, 2 threats down. The men below looked up, disbelief in their voices. Is that? Keep moving, she shouted through the radio. North Ridge is clear for 50 meters. Push to that position. They moved, crawling, limping, firing. One man stumbled. She fired again, covering him. The lieutenant beside her reloaded shakily, adrenaline overtaking fear. Ma'am, we're running low. Then make your shots count. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes but felt like an hour. When the last shot echoed away, the valley fell silent again. Sarah exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. Her hands trembled. The rescue team climbed toward her, dirty, exhausted, stunned. One of them, young, barely 30, looked at her with wide eyes. You're Captain Mitchell, he said quietly, the ghost. She gave a faint smile. Not anymore. He shook his head. You just proved otherwise. Back at base, medics worked quickly, tending to the wounded. The colonel met her at the perimeter, relief and frustration battling on his face. You disobeyed orders, he said. Good thing I wasn't under yours, she replied calmly. He sighed. I should reprimand you. You should, she said, voice even, but you won't. He didn't. That night, she sat outside the tent under a canopy of stars, the same indifferent sky she had bled under years ago. Her leg throbbed again, but she didn't mind. It reminded her that she'd still done what needed to be done. Rodriguez's voice came through her secure line from the States. Heard what happened. Couldn't stay retired, huh? She smiled faintly. Didn't plan on it. Trouble just found me. He chuckled. Still think you're not the ghost. I'm something else now, she said quietly. Something that finally understands what all this was for. He hesitated. And what's that? She looked up at the stars. To make sure no one ever feels as alone out there as I did. The next morning, the rescue team requested a meeting before redeploying. They stood in formation, dusty and bruised, eyes steady. The young operator from the firefight stepped forward, holding out a patch. It was the emblem of their unit, worn, faded, but intact. Ma'am, he said, this belongs with you. We wouldn't be standing here if not for what you taught us. Sarah took it slowly, fingers brushing over the stitched letters. The Mitchell Protocol. She nodded once. Keep training, keep adapting, and when it's your turn to lead, lead with your heart, not your fear. As they saluted, she turned away, not because she was dismissing them, but because her eyes had begun to sting. On the flight home, she sat by the window, watching the mountains drift beneath her like waves of stone. Her cane rested beside her, the patch in her hand. She thought of all the times she'd questioned her purpose, all the times she wondered why she survived. Maybe this was the answer. Not survival, not legacy. Continuation. Because in every soldier she trained, in every decision they made to save instead of destroy, a small part of her kept living not as a ghost, but as a guide. As the engines hummed softly and the sky glowed pink with dawn, she closed her eyes. The war inside her wasn't gone, but for the first time it wasn't winning either. Sometimes the mission doesn't end when the shooting stops. Sometimes it begins when you decide to live differently than before. Why did victory always feel so heavy? The plane touched down just after dawn, the sky still half asleep. Sarah Mitchell sat near the window, her reflection staring back at her through the glass. Same uniform, same calm expression, but something behind the eyes had shifted. The air smelled of jet fuel and rain. She hadn't set foot on American soil in months, yet the first thing she felt was not relief. It was guilt. She'd gone against protocol, again. Saved lives, yes, but she'd also broken rules. And in Washington, rules mattered more than reasons. At the terminal, two MPs waited by the transport jeep. No smiles, no salutes, just quiet professionalism. "Captain Mitchell," one of them said, "the Secretary of Defense wants to see you immediately." She nodded once. Of course he does. The ride into the city was silent. Streets blurred by, rain streaking the windows, the faint hum of tires over asphalt filling the empty space between thoughts. Sarah watched the skyline rise, the Washington Monument piercing the gray horizon. She used to love this city. Now it felt distant, like it belonged to another version of her. When they reached the Pentagon, she adjusted her cane, smoothed her uniform, and followed the escort inside. The corridors were polished, sterile, echoing. She walked them before, after the medal ceremony, after the injury, after the speeches that promised meaning. But this time there were no cameras, no applause, just consequences. The conference room was cold and bright. Around the table sat 4 men and 2 women, senior defense officials, generals, and advisors. The air was thick with tension, and somewhere under it all, quiet curiosity. At the far end sat General Tangdahl, the woman who'd recruited her for the Mitchell Protocol. "Captain Mitchell," the Secretary of Defense began, folding his hands. "You were assigned as a civilian advisor to a joint training operation, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And during that assignment, you entered an active combat zone without authorization, engaged armed hostiles, and led a rescue operation." "Yes, sir." "Why?" She didn't hesitate. Because there were soldiers in danger, and no one else close enough to help. The room went quiet. The secretary leaned back. "You understand the risk that puts this department in, Captain. You are no longer classified as active duty. You had no authority to act in combat." Sarah's voice stayed even. "With respect, sir, authority didn't matter. Time did." General Tangdahl's eyes softened, but she said nothing. One of the advisors, a man with a permanent scowl, leaned forward. "You jeopardized a NATO exercise and could have sparked an international incident." Sarah met his gaze. "And if I hadn't gone, you'd be reading 7 names off a casualty list instead." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Finally, Tangdahl cleared her throat. "Captain Mitchell's actions resulted in 0 friendly fatalities. Her engagement neutralized an unanticipated threat and prevented the loss of Allied personnel." The secretary sighed. "That may be true, but the optics—" "Optics?" Sarah interrupted quietly. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The single word froze the room. She leaned forward slightly. "Sir, with all due respect, optics don't bleed. Optics don't drag wounded men out of gunfire. Optics don't hear the last breath of someone who trusted you to bring them home. The words hung there, sharp as glass. For a moment she wondered if she'd gone too far, but Tangdal didn't look angry. She looked proud. The secretary finally exhaled. "You're lucky your results speak louder than your insubordination, but this can't happen again." Sarah nodded. "It won't." "Good," he said, shuffling papers. "Because we've decided to formalize the Mitchell Protocol into official doctrine, effective immediately. Your name will be attached to it permanently." She blinked, caught off guard. "My name?" "You earned it," Tangdal said simply. "The soldiers you've trained, the tactics you've developed, they're changing how we operate. The world should know where it came from." For a long moment, Sarah didn't respond. Her name, her work, immortalized. But for some reason, it didn't feel like triumph. She saluted, turned to leave, and as she reached the door, Tangdal spoke softly. "You did the right thing out there, Captain, even if it cost you in here." Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "That's always how it works, isn't it, ma'am?" Outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled like wet concrete and old promises. She walked alone down the steps of the Pentagon, her cane clicking against the stone. Each sound echoed, reminding her that even heroes walk heavy when they come home. Later that evening, she sat in her small apartment overlooking the Potomac. The lights of the city reflected in the river, like stars drowning in motion. On her coffee table lay the letter she'd written to herself after the hospital, the one she'd never opened. She unfolded it slowly, her own handwriting starring back. "If you're reading this, you made it home again. But don't forget, coming home isn't the same as being whole." Her breath caught slightly. She hadn't remembered writing that part. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Rodriguez standing there, still in uniform, holding 2 takeout coffees. "You didn't think I'd let you get chewed out by the Pentagon without backup, did you?" he said with a grin. She laughed softly. "You always show up when things go sideways." "That's the Mitchell way," he said, stepping inside. They sat on the couch, watching the rain start again, steam rising from their cups. He studied her quietly. "You know, when you trained us, I thought it was just tactics, shooting, endurance, survival, but it was more than that. You taught us to feel again, to care about the ones next to us. That's rare." She looked out the window. "Care doesn't win wars." "No," he said, "but it keeps people human while fighting them." The simplicity of it hit her harder than she expected. For years, she tried to reconcile those two truths, that the job demanded you harden your heart, but survival demanded you keep it beating. Maybe that was what the protocol really was, not a system of tactics, but a balance between duty and humanity. After he left, she stood by the window, watching lightning flicker over the river. Her reflection stared back, not the soldier, not the patient, not the legend, just her. She whispered quietly, "You did good today." For the first time, she didn't need anyone else to tell her that. The next morning she reported to Fort Bragg for an internal ceremony. Small, private, no cameras. General Tangdal was there again, along with Colonel Haynes and a handful of the trainees she'd once mentored, now instructors themselves. Tangdal stepped forward, holding a small framed document. "This," she said, "is the official certification of the Mitchell Protocol, now adopted by Special Operations Command. It's not just a training model, it's a legacy." Sarah looked around the room, the faces she'd shaped, the lives she'd touched. She felt something rise in her chest, not pride but peace. When Tangdal handed her the frame, Sarah said quietly, "This belongs to all of them, the ones still out there, the ones who didn't make it back." Tangdal nodded solemnly. "It always does." After the ceremony, she lingered in the empty hall. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, dust motes swirling like slow snow. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass frame she held. Endure, adapt, return. Her words, her promise. She smiled softly. Looks like we did all three. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of helicopters from the nearby airfield, rhythmic, familiar, eternal. For the first time, the sound didn't pull her backward into memory. It carried her forward. She stood there for a long time, eyes closed, breathing in the quiet strength that only comes after surviving yourself. She knew the war wasn't truly over, not out there, not in here, but she had made peace with it. Because sometimes, the only victory worth having is knowing you gave more than you had, and still had something left to give. Sometimes, survival isn't about staying alive. It's about learning to live in a world that no longer needs your strength, and giving it anyway. Why did the kid look so familiar? It was his stance, the way he carried his rifle, the quiet alertness behind his eyes. Sarah Mitchell noticed it the moment he stepped into the training hall. He was young, maybe 21, too young to have that much silence in him already. The new class of recruits stood at attention as she walked past, her cane tapping rhythmically against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the wide, sunlit room like a slow metronome of authority. She stopped in front of him. "Name?" "Private Ethan Cole, ma'am." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "Where are you from, Private?" "Texas, ma'am." She nodded, studying him for a moment longer before moving on, but something about him stayed with her. Not his confidence, not his bearing, his eyes. Eyes that had already seen loss. Later, as the trainees broke into groups, she watched him from the sidelines. His form was perfect, his focus unwavering, but there was something underneath it, the same restlessness she once carried like a heartbeat. Rodriguez approached her quietly. "You've got that look again." She didn't glance at him. "What look?" "The one that says you're about to adopt another lost soul." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just see too much of myself in this one." "Then do him a favor," Rodriguez said gently. "Make sure he doesn't end up carrying what you did." That night, she stayed late reviewing evaluation reports. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional distant thunder rolling outside. Cole's file sat near the top of the stack. Marksman qualification, exceptional. Tactical coordination, top 2%. Psychological assessment, guarded. There was a note from the intake psychologist. Displays emotional detachment, possible trauma response, avoids personal discussion. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Guarded," she murmured. "Yeah, I know that word." The next morning, she called him into her office. He stood in the doorway, rigid as a board. "At ease, Private," she said. "I'm not going to bite." He relaxed slightly, though his eyes stayed wary. "You've got good instincts," she said. "Your range scores are near perfect, but you move like someone waiting for something bad to happen." He hesitated. "With respect, ma'am, something bad usually does." She tilted her head, studying him. "You been in combat before?" "My brother, ma'am," he said after a pause. "Marines killed in Helmand 2 years ago. I enlisted after." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Wasn't your fault." "No," she said quietly, "but I know what it's like to lose someone you can't bring back. It doesn't go away. You just learn how to carry it better." He looked at her, uncertain whether to believe that. "Let me guess," she continued. "You thought coming here would make it make sense, that maybe if you were good enough, strong enough, you could balance the scales." He said nothing. His silence was the answer. She leaned forward. "That's not how it works. War doesn't give closure. It only gives choices. What you do with the pain, that's what defines you." For the first time, he looked straight at her. "And what did you do with yours, ma'am?" She didn't hesitate. "I almost let it bury me. Then I decided to build something out of it instead." He nodded, silent again. But something in his expression had changed, not acceptance, not yet, but understanding. As weeks passed, Sarah began to see the cracks in him and the strength between them. He worked harder than anyone, stayed longer at the range, volunteered for extra drills. But his discipline came from fear, not drive. Fear of failing, fear of losing control. One afternoon, she found him on the outdoor range long after everyone else had gone. The sky was burning orange, the wind dry and restless. He was firing shot after shot, precise, relentless, mechanical. She walked up quietly. "You're supposed to be off duty, Cole." He didn't look up, "Needed to clear my head." "From what?" He reloaded. "Dreams. Same ones every night, my brother calling for me, I can't move, I can't help him, then I wake up." Sarah stood beside him, watching the targets. "How long since you've slept through the night?" He gave a humorless smile. "Does anyone in this place?" She nodded slowly. "You think not sleeping makes you stronger. It doesn't, it just makes you slower to heal." He finally lowered his rifle, his voice small. "How did you stop it, the dreams?" She was quiet for a long time before answering. "I didn't. I just learned to stop being afraid of them." He turned to her. "How?" "By remembering that I survived what caused them." He stared at her, processing it. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "You were the one they call Ghost, weren't you?" She froze for a moment, not because of the name, but because of the tone. It wasn't awe, it was recognition. "Yes," she said softly, "I was." He nodded slowly. "My brother used to talk about you, said there was this sniper, the one who made it out of Kandahar. He said she reminded him why he wanted to serve." Her throat tightened. "Your brother's name?" "Daniel Cole." The name hit like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She remembered it, the after-action report, the firefight near Helmand, the loss list that had crossed her desk years ago. "I remember," she whispered. "He saved 3 men that day, stayed behind so they could get clear." Ethan looked at her in disbelief. "You knew him?" "I didn't know him," she said, "but I knew what kind of man he was." For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, the past and present folding together under the fatting sun. Then she said quietly, "He'd be proud of you, you know, but he'd want you to stop trying to be him." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking slightly. "I just don't want to waste what he gave up." "You're not," she said gently. "You're honoring it by surviving." He looked at her, eyes wet, but he nodded. After that, something shifted. Ethan trained differently, not with desperation but purpose. Sarah watched it happen like watching winter melt. One day during live drills, he hesitated during a tactical retreat, froze for half a second under simulated fire. Afterward, he walked straight to her. "I froze," he said bluntly. "Didn't even think, just locked up." She nodded. "Good." He frowned. "Good. You realized it. That's the first step to mastering it. Every soldier freezes. Only the honest ones admit it." He laughed softly. "That what they taught you?" "No," she said. "That's what I learned the hard way." By the end of the cycle, he was the best in his class, not just in skill, but in composure. During the final review, when the recruits were dismissed, he lingered. "Ma'am." "Go on, Cole. You've earned your weekend." He hesitated. "Thank you, for I don't know, seeing me, I guess." She smiled. "That's what leaders do." After he left, she stayed behind in the empty hall. The sunlight caught the edge of her cane, throwing thin lines of gold across the floor. She thought about Daniel Cole, about all the brothers, sisters, and friends whose stories ended too soon, and about how maybe, just maybe, she was helping write better endings for the next generation. Later that night, as the base settled into silence, she sat on the bench overlooking the field. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter from the barracks, something rare and precious in places built on discipline. Rodriguez found her there, as he often did. "Kid's coming along," he said. She nodded. "He'll make a good soldier, better than I was." Rodriguez chuckled. Don't start with that. No, I mean it, she said softly. He's learning to lead without losing himself. That's something I never figured out until too late. He studied her face. You ever think maybe that's why you're here, to make sure they don't repeat your mistakes? She looked up at the stars, her expression unreadable. Maybe, or maybe they'll make new ones and teach someone else how to survive them. For a while, neither spoke, just the hum of night and the quiet rhythm of their shared understanding. Finally, Sarah said, I used to think my story ended on that ridge in Kandahar, but maybe that was just where it started. Rodriguez smiled. You really are a teacher now. She laughed softly. God help me. They sat there until the lights went out across the base, the night swallowing the sound of their voices. And in that stillness, Sarah finally felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of quiet redemption. Not because she'd erased her past, because she'd learned to make peace with it. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting the ghosts. It's about teaching them how to walk beside you without haunting your steps. Why did the world always call when she thought she was done answering? It was early morning at Fort Bragg. The air smelled of dew and jet fuel, the kind of scent that never truly left a soldier's skin. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat alone on the training field bleachers, sipping black coffee, watching the first class of Mitchell Protocol graduates line up for deployment. Their uniforms were sharp, their movements precise. But their eyes were alive. That was what mattered most to her now, that they were leaving as people, not machines. She adjusted her cane beside her, stretching her leg carefully. The ache was constant, dull, familiar, like an old comrade who never stopped reminding her what survival costs. The wind picked up, carrying distant laughter from the mess hall. She smiled faintly. These kids, they were better prepared than she ever was. Smarter, kinder, more aware of what war really meant. Rodriguez's voice came from behind her. You watching them or worrying about them? Both, she said without looking back. He sat beside her, balancing a coffee of his own. You can't protect them forever, Sarah. She nodded. I know, but maybe I can teach them how to protect themselves from what comes after. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the teams disperse. You ever think about retiring for real? He asked. She chuckled softly. I did, once. Then I realized retirement feels too much like surrender. He smiled. You make a terrible civilian. Don't remind me. The morning went on quietly until an officer approached, his expression tight. Ma'am, he said, you're needed in command immediately. Sarah frowned. What's going on? Accident, ma'am. Joint training operation overseas. A small unit ran into trouble during a recon exercise, enemy contact. One of the soldiers was part of your program. Her chest tightened. Name. The officer hesitated. Private Ethan Cole. The coffee fell from her hand before she realized it. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, quietly but firmly, get me the line to command, now. Inside the operations room, monitors glowed with satellite feeds. Static filled the speakers. A communications officer turned to her. We've got partial contact, ma'am. They're pinned near the southern ridge outside Jalrez Valley. Limited cover. We've alerted support units, but weather's grounding the air assets. Sarah's voice was calm. They're holding position. Yes, ma'am, but they won't last long. She took a breath, closing her eyes. Not again. The general in charge, a man she'd briefed a dozen times before, placed a hand on her shoulder. Captain Mitchell, they've been following your protocol to the letter. Cole's team secured wounded, set up defensive lines. They're doing everything right. Sarah nodded faintly. That doesn't mean they'll make it. Rescue convoy is 2 hours out, he continued. All we can do now is monitor. She shook her head. No, that's not all we can do. Her hand tightened on the edge of the console. Patch me through to their frequency. The room went silent. The general hesitated, then nodded. A radio technician adjusted the dials, and after a burst of static, a strained voice came through. Alpha Team copy, we're holding but running low, need evac. Sarah grabbed the mic. Cole, it's Mitchell, do you copy? A pause, then disbelief. Ma'am, Captain Mitchell. I'm here, Private, tell me your situation. Pinned down on the ridge. 2 wounded. We've got hostiles closing in from the east, can't move without losing someone. Her mind snapped instantly into the old rhythm. Okay, listen to me carefully. You remember the drill from week 6, adaptive retreat protocol. Yes, ma'am. Good, you're going to reposition in staggered pairs. Use the slope as partial defilade. Don't look for full cover, look for concealment. You move, then you cover. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. You understand? Yes, ma'am. Her voice softened. Ethan, you've trained for this. You know what to do. There was a pause, then a faint tremor in his voice. You told me once that fear means you still care. I'm scared as hell right now. She closed her eyes, her throat tight. Good, that means you'll make it home. Now move. The radio went quiet except for the crackle of gunfire in the distance. Every minute felt like a year. Officers in the room watched her, silent, deferential, as if afraid to breathe too loud. Then finally a voice through static. This is Alpha Team. Ridge secured, hostiles retreating, we're clear. A cheer rippled through the room. Sarah exhaled slowly, her knuckles white against the console. Good work, Cole, she said softly. Wouldn't have done it without you, ma'am. She smiled faintly. You already did. When the line went dead, she stayed standing for a long time, staring at the map. Rodriguez entered quietly, reading her face. You okay? She nodded slowly. He made it. Because of you. Sarah looked at him, eyes tired but alive. No, because he believed in something bigger than fear. She left the operations center in silence. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through heavy clouds, washing the base in gold. Later that evening, she sat alone in her office, the light fading. The letter from Ethan arrived 2 days later, hand-delivered, smudged with dust and sweat. Ma'am, we're all home safe. You once said survival isn't victory. You were right, but knowing we lived the right way, that feels close enough. You gave me my brother back in a way, through every lesson you taught. Thank you for not giving up on any of us. Ethan. She read it twice before folding it carefully and tucking it beside the old letter from years ago, the one written by another soldier who'd lived because of her words. 2 different names, same message. She'd done what she set out to do. Weeks passed. The seasons turned. The Mitchell Protocol grew into something larger, now taught across branches, its principles used from training bases to field manuals. But Sarah stayed in the background. She never wanted fame. She just wanted to keep them alive. One morning, she visited Arlington. The air was cold, sharp, honest. Rows of white headstones stretched across the hill like silent ranks of memory. She moved slowly between them, her cane pressing soft impressions into the grass. She stopped at one, Daniel Cole. Kneeling carefully, she placed a single metal ribbon at the base of the stone. He made it, she whispered. Your brother, you'd be proud. A quiet breeze swept past, rustling the leaves. For a moment, she imagined it was an answer. She stood, eyes shining, and saluted, not for formality, but for gratitude. As she turned to leave, her gaze caught the reflection of her shadow stretching long across the field. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like part of the landscape, grounded, enduring, real. Back at Fort Bragg, the next generation waited. A new class, fresh faces, bright eyes, steady hearts. When she entered the hall, the room fell silent, not out of fear but respect. She stood at the front, cane by her side, scanning the room slowly. Before we begin, she said, her voice steady, calm, timeless, I want you to remember one thing. You are not invincible. You're human. That's your greatest strength." Her words hung there, simple and sacred. You will face fear, doubt, loss. You will make mistakes. But every time you get back up, every time you choose compassion over chaos, you win. She looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. That's what the Mitchell Protocol means. It's not about shooting straighter or running faster. It's about remembering who you are when everything around you tries to make you forget. The recruits listened in stillness, the kind that comes not from discipline but belief. She finished quietly. "I can't promise you'll all make it home, but I can promise this: if you live with honor, if you fight with purpose, then whatever happens out there, you'll never really be gone." Silence followed, deep, reverent, absolute. Then one of the recruits, a young woman in the back, raised her hand. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "why do you still wear the call sign Ghost if you're not in the field anymore?" Sarah smiled softly. "Because a ghost isn't someone who's dead. It's someone who refuses to disappear." The room fell quiet again, and for the first time in her life, that word didn't sting. It felt right. It felt earned. When class ended, she lingered as the recruits filed out, their chatter filling the hallway. She stayed behind, looking at the empty chairs, the spaces where tomorrow's soldiers would sit, learn, and maybe someday remember her words when the world turned dark. Outside, the sun dipped low over the horizon. The field stretched endlessly, golden and still. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "You did it again," he said. "Made them believe." She turned, smiling faintly. "That's all any of us can do, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah, but you do it better than most." She looked past him at the fading light, her voice soft, reflective. "Funny. I used to think my job was pulling triggers. Turns out it was planting seeds." He grinned, poetic as always. "Just honest," she said. They walked out together, the sky deepening to amber and violet. The air was cool, clean, quiet. Sarah stopped near the edge of the training field and looked back at the building, the flags, the shadows stretching long over the grass. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "you ever wonder how we'll be remembered?" He shrugged, "Maybe as the ones who tried." She nodded slowly. "That's enough for me." They stood there until the lights came on one by one across the base, each beam cutting through the dusk like a promise. As the wind whispered through the trees, Sarah let out a long, slow breath, the kind that carries both endings and beginnings. Her war was over. Her mission was not. She turned toward the horizon, cane in hand, the faint sound of helicopters echoing in the distance, steady, rhythmic, eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it's gone, the silence it leaves behind teaches others how to live.